Hello, so welcome to Discover Dorico for June. Um, there are some people who've already asked a few questions on live chat. As always, if you want to ask any questions and me to include things before the session, email at any point during the month to discoverdorico@steinberg.de, and we'll see what we can include. So since our last session, it's been great to physically meet some of you on my travels, including a mystery mister and various others over the last month. That might have been at Yamaha Music London, or when I was in popped over to Hamburg. There's some training we've done at the office in Old Street, also at Farnborough Sixth Form College, the Royal Conservatoire and the Scottish Music Centre in Glasgow, the RWAMD in Cardiff, the Royal Academy in London, where Daniel ran a session, and Habs Boys School near Elstree yesterday. And if any of you are in Queensland next month at the Maryborough Music Conference, please come and say hi. I'll be on the Yamaha stand and running some sessions with Peter Wardrope. So today, I'll try and be a bit quicker today because there's been a lot to take in, obviously, recently. The big news this week, well, if not this year, is obviously that 1.1 was released yesterday. So Dorico 1.1 now available. So you can see on my screen here, I've got the steinberg.net/Dorico. Just click on the resources button and you'll get to the resources page. This is a useful place to come for all sorts of reasons now. So you can check out all sorts of things on here. Now, version 1.1 is a big milestone. It's the biggest of the 4 updates we've done so far. Been many new features, and we showed some of these, previewed them last month and in the Discover Dorico session. But on here, you can now, there's a link to our YouTube channel. So if you want to check out all of the how-to videos that Anthony's done, there's also a link to the Making Notes blog. So if you want to find out where Daniel's been discussing lots of the things, here's his latest blog post. And on there's also lots of new videos that Anthony's done for things that are new in Dorico 1.1. I think there's 8 or 9 videos on there now, and also on our Dorico channel. Don't forget to subscribe to the Dorico channel, and then you can find out all the latest things that are happening on there. Of course, there's also links to the forum, so if you want to ask questions of any of us, you can ask questions on there. There's this important link here, which is Dorico updates and downloads. That will take you to the downloads page. If you haven't already downloaded Dorico 1.1, then I encourage you to do so. If you prefer, instead of watching all the videos about things, because there's also down here, there's how to work with Dorico videos, the engrave mode videos Anthony's done, the write mode videos, setup mode videos, the Dorico version history. If you want some bedtime reading, you can read this version history PDF about all of the new things that are in it. If you want somebody else's take on things, if you go, for example, to the scoringnotes.com blog, then there's a review. I've had a quick count up. It's over 7,000 words, so it's quite in depth, but it's very, very good. So if you want to have a read instead of watching some of our videos, you can have a read of that one. So as I said, the resources page is somewhere you know, is a very useful place to go now. There's also at the bottom some Dorico example pages of some examples which have I believe done in-house and checked by engravers. And you can download these PDFs and just have a look at them to see the kind of things that you can now do. As a quick flick through some of them, here's the one that I downloaded earlier. So there's some Bach inventions and another Bach excerpt, some Bartok, some Chopin, some pedal lines, piano pedal lines, and various other options. So you can download all of these and have a look at them at your own leisure. Now, at the last session, we kind of went through a bit of lots of the things that were going to come up. That was the preview to 1.1 in May. So I thought in this session this month, we'd link up a couple of these things and how you might actually use them, and also with a couple of questions and things that have come up over the last month. So presuming you have version 1.1 already installed, or you've using the new trial, there's a new 30-day trial for that one. Then you can follow along if you want to. And obviously it's live at the moment, but if you're watching it on catch up, then just press pause at any point. So a couple of things just kind of note input wise that I thought some people might find quite useful, and I certainly have. I'm going to start a new piece, so I'm just press Shift P, and I'll add a piano as I often do, but it's quite appropriate this piece. Now, what I'm going to do from here, I'm going to put this one into 6/8. So I'll add a meter. There we go. So we're in 6/8. Now, lots of the time when you're entering things, if you're just entering, for example, crotchets and quavers, we've shown various examples where you just enter a note row, all of the same length, and then using insert mode, change the notes, the length of those notes later on. But here's another option. So what I'm going to do here is type in the tune for All Blues, the Miles Davis tune, and it's got some very long notes and some very short notes. Now the first note, believe me for now because we haven't typed it in, is a dotted crotchet tied to a crotchet tied to a semiquaver. So you'd enter a dotted crotchet. I do have a MIDI keyboard in front of me. And we tie that to another one, and we tie that to something else. So you've entered effectively 3 notes to get that one note. But if we use our rhythm grid, so down in the bottom left corner down here, if we use our rhythm grid, we can set that to a useful, in this case, semiquaver option. And now when we can use a shortcut, which is you hold down Alt-Shift and you use the left and right arrows to lengthen or shorten a note along that rhythm grid, the option we've selected. So if I press Alt-Shift and do left, then it will shorten it, and Alt-Shift right will lengthen it. So now I can enter approximately the notes I want and just lengthen and shorten appropriately for whatever I need. So I'll now enter some shorter notes that I need for this piece. And then I need roughly that kind of length. Actually, no, I need it to be slightly longer, so I'll use Alt-Shift, right arrow. And I'll just press the right arrow to move the carrot line on, and then I'll enter a few more notes. What do we need at this point? Something, oh yeah, again, we need a slightly longer note. So because I can't easily select in one move effectively a minim tied to a semiquaver, just entering either a minim and lengthening it, or possibly in some cases a dotted minim and shortening it slightly, is actually often less key presses and an easier way to get exactly to what you need. So I'll enter a few more of the notes from here so we can carry on. Actually, that one needs to be shorter, and then I can enter these kind of more standard. I can just enter the quavers and semiquavers as we go. And that one actually needs to be slightly longer, so I can carry on. And so it's actually relatively quick and easy then to not necessarily go, the note I exactly need is. You can just lengthen and shorten notes and move the carrot around with the arrow keys to be exactly where you need to be. Let's finish this one off. And there we go. So there's the tune. So Alt-Shift and left and right arrows. That will get you to is a very useful way of extending note values. You can also use them for lots of other things. So if I said in here that actually what I want to do is enter a dynamic, so if I put in a hairpin, for example, here, then I can use Alt-Shift, left and right arrows to lengthen or shorten that hairpin. It will then jump to the various notes, and you can see the attachment lines jumping. Hold down Command on Mac or Control on PC as well, so you can see the shortcut appearing on the screen. That will now move along the rhythm grid, so I get fine with Control if I need it, but in most cases, Alt-Shift, left and right will get you to exactly where you want to because it will snap to the right note heads. So if I just quickly put the second line of this in, so I need another treble clef. And then if we put these notes in, and now these I suppose are slightly quicker. Somebody did ask in the week, is there an equivalent of R for repeat? Yes, it's R for repeat. I think actually they were having a shortcut issue at that point. But anyway, so I just pressed Command Shift left or Control Shift left to select all of the notes in that bar, and then I can just press R to repeat those. Now if I carry on just to do the rest of this line. And of course you can copy and paste, so I'll just hold down Alt and copy that one, and copy that a couple of times. And now here, actually I'll stick a couple of chords in. If actually I'll that way around, and then I'll probably carry on with to the end. Oops, my mistake. I'll undo. So there you go. We've quickly entered those. So, but the important thing there is that so often, if you just need something, tied just to something else, use Alt Shift left right arrow, and that will let you get you to the right places. But make sure your rhythm grid is set correctly. And of course, the shortcut for the rhythm grid is Alt and the square brackets. So if you'll see in the bottom left corner of the screen, as I'm pressing these shortcuts, the rhythm grid is changing along there. So now, of course, one of the biggest things, I suppose, in version 1.1 is chords. So I'm going to select this note here. With a normal QWERTY keyboard, you're using the shortcut Q. So to enter chord symbols, you use Shift Q, and that will get you the little popover. Now, there's a couple, in fact, of really good videos of Anthony explaining what lots of the shortcuts are and what you can enter and when you want to put an augmented or a minor and all the various options you can press there. So if you haven't watched it already, it doesn't take very long. It really will cover a lot of the options. But here's a couple of the ones I use, and in particular, because I've got a MIDI keyboard still in front of me, I tend to play the chords in, and I've noticed there'll be a few cases where you go, oh, but that isn't quite what I wanted. So for example, the first chord I want to play is G7, and by default, with my right hand, I tend to just play F, B, D. And you'll see I get F6, brackets emit 355. Now, also shortcut-wise, the way that, and this is at the moment default settings, so you should find the same. If I press Command left, then you'll go back to the chord I've just played. So if I played another chord, then it would write over the one I've already done. So Command left or Control left will get you back to the previous chord. Doesn't really matter how far away it is, but it will get you back to that previous chord. So now when I enter that chord, if I was to play F, G, B, D, then it would say, oh, well, how about G over F? So, well, yes, but again, it might not be quite what you wanted. So I recommend before you enter any chords, what you actually do is you have a look in the note input options. And this is in the right menu at the very bottom, note input options. But also the shortcut is Command Shift I, or if you're on PC, Control Shift I. Now in this dialog, there are a few things that if you just tweak them slightly to match exactly what you want, then you can get what you want. Now, I will just say that actually, I know that the chord I wanted, if I used to include a bass G, so I played a G with my left hand, and with the right hand, I played the same F, B, D. But sometimes you don't want to use two hands to input chords. You just want to use one because your other hand is using shortcuts for other things, or or holding a cup of tea. So in this note input options, what you might want to do, for example, is in my case, the first chord I played, it had omissions in it. So it was saying, I'd missed out something. And then later on, it will do the same. So I'm going to say in this omissions section, ignore in all chords. So later on, I won't be playing the 5 in a D7 sharp 9, partly through laziness or lack of fingers or lack of knowledge in my case, maybe. But I'm going to say omissions to the chord, you can ignore all of those. And there's also other things, for example, inversions here, you can ignore the played inversion or consider the played inversion. And because it was considering the played inversion, that's where I was getting, for example, the G over F, or I was getting, some of the other options when I was just playing F, B, D. So I could ignore the played inversion if I wanted to. There's also what you want to do with seconds. Do you want seconds or ninths? And do you want, the add ninths and 11ths? And there's various other options in here as well. And what you want to do with altered bass notes and various other things. So set these before you start entering any chords, and then you should find what you'll get actually what you intended. Also in the MIDI input section, there's options, for example, here, advanced during chord symbol input via MIDI keyboard. So when I press a note or a chord on the MIDI keyboard, what's it going to do? by default, it goes to the next beat, which is what I normally expect, and that's the default. But if you only ever have one chord per bar, always, and you don't want to have to move the caret on yourself manually, then you can do next bar, and it will do that automatically. And there's some other options in here, so you can play with those. And don't forget that this note input options window can stay open. So if you've got two monitors, leave that open on another monitor, experiment with some of these options, playing in some chords, and then you don't have to go and find the dialogue again. You can just choose another option, press apply, and leave that on another window to come back to it later. So now I'm going to enter the chords in here. So I've done the first one, and actually my next one isn't going to be till down here. So if I play a chord in there, now I can use the space bar to advance, and that will advance to the next beat. I can also use tab to advance to the next bar. So I'll carry on, one there, next bar, and then I'm going to put and then that one. And actually, those that D7 sharp 9, it would have normally done emit 5, except I told it not to do emissions. Now I've entered the chords from a MIDI keyboard. Just because I noticed there's a just bear with me a second. There's some comments. Let me just check. There's nothing in here that somebody's asking me about that nobody else has answered. Bear with me 2 seconds. The cross-grade deal has now been extended to the 30th of September 2017, in case you're watching this in a different year. So the cross-grade has now been extended. Some comments I can't really say live. Most of those is okay. So just to carry on then for a second. So some of the things we've been just looking at here. So chord symbols, how you move on between bars, and what the options are, and what the preferences are. Now, of course, there's also the engraving options. If you haven't seen this one, then in your engraving options dialog in chord symbols, you can now choose your presets and what you want to appear. So there's the default ones, and then there's a bunch of other examples. I suggest you enter some chords and have a look at these. It's a very long dialogue. It's covered in great detail, both in Daniel's blog or even in the scoring notes review, as to some of the options you might want to use and how and everything else. So, but feel free to have a look down this dialogue, and we did look at that one in more detail last month. Also, if you prefer, we looked last month at some MIDI shortcuts for things. So if you want to set a MIDI shortcut to move the chord symbol and the caret on, for example, so when you're entering chord symbols, if you want to move on by beat occasionally or bar, and you want to set MIDI shortcuts for that, in the preferences, if you search in the key commands for chord, then the advanced chord symbol input options for how to advance to next bar and next beat and next grid position and that kind of thing, and of course all the previous options, they appear in the preferences, so you can now press the MIDI learn button and assign a MIDI shortcut to those. So if you've got shortcuts that you want to assign yourself, then you can do that in there. Somebody also asked, so where do chord symbols appear? Of course, I've only got one piano at the moment, but if I was to add a guitar, of course, the chord symbols also appeared on the guitar as well as the piano. By default, will appear for rhythm instruments. So that's why they're appearing on the piano and guitar here. If I go back to setup mode and I add some other, for example, if I add my trumpet, and let's say we're also going to add sax, alto sax, let's add a tenor as well. Then the chord symbols by default haven't appeared on the trumpet and the two saxophones. Who hasn't done this before, you can drag these players around. So if you want them to be in a different order, then no problem, you can drag them around. Click on these players, there's a new chord symbols option at the bottom, and you can choose whether or not the chords are going to display. So, for example, if we just take some of this music and let's copy some to the alto saxophone, a quick lazy arrange will filter out, because we now have filters, of course. We'll filter out the second notes, we'll cut those out and give them to the tenor. Now, if I was to enter a chord, for example, on the alto saxophone, then you'll notice that not only is it put it on the alto saxophone, it's also added it to the rhythm instruments, and all of the chord symbols are now appearing for the alto saxophone because you've told Dorico that you want to put chords on there. But if you want to do this manually or at any point, you can choose from here for any of these instruments for chord symbols. Do you want them to show for all instruments, including this one, show just for rhythm section instruments, or hide for all instruments? And you can also have them that they show in full score and parts, or just, for example, in the parts. Somebody then asked about showing or hiding them just for solo sections. So, for example, if we said, and let's do this in galley view, so we're in one long view. Let's say you only want them to appear for, let's say this is the small solo section at the end. If I select the alto saxophone part and was to filter the chord symbols, I suppose a new shortcut that you might want to use is to use a Command and Alt or Control and Alt on PC, and you can drag a selection round, and that removes things from a selection. If you want to add things to a selection, then you hold down Command or Control, and you can just drag and add things to a selection. So now I've got some chords up here and these notes selected. But so Command and Alt will remove it from the selection. So you can, for example, select all the chords, solo section, and in the properties panel at the bottom, you can now make those hidden. So I've got these chords shown, all of the other chords in the saxophone part, and I do get these little signposts, these little flags. If you don't want to see those either, then go to View Signposts and just untick chord symbols, and then you won't see any of the signposts for chord symbols. I think we showed last time, but just in case we didn't, if we copy things around, and it includes things like dynamics, maybe the end of that one as well. Oops, copied it to somewhere else in the bar. That's very helpful. When you select them, we've got similar shortcuts that we had before in the attachment lines. And also, if I just hide the properties panel so you can see both dynamics at the top and the bottom, as I change one of them, they're now grouped, and somebody was asking me about those. So when you right-click on these now in dynamics, you can group and you can link and unlink as well. And the difference is that because they're in the same rhythmic position, when I make a change to one, it's also affecting the other ones at the same rhythmic position down here. But also there is a horizontal option as well. So if the notes were going to push this hairpin out of the way and it was lined up and linked or grouped to some of the other items horizontally, then they would also position up and down at the same time. So have a look at some of those, and of course the filters and other options that now exist. Somebody was also asking, and just before this session started, about playback of chords. Now, because chords, when you put them in, they automatically appear for rhythm instruments. They're not just on one staff. And if you have a look in play mode, you'll see the chord symbols and displayed up here in their own little chord track. So from in here, you can choose, for example, Halion to play them back. You can choose which slot to put them in. So you could say, well, my jazz guitar is in slot 2, so I'll put these into slot 2. I've noticed that sometimes they'll disappear from this view. If you just get it to update by toggling this little play speaker icon, then they'll come back. But you can now, so they will now play back. I mean, it'll just go kind of plonk. It will play the chord that I played in from the MIDI keyboard. So you might want to consider that as to when you play these back, how you played them in the first place. Set the options accordingly, and maybe include a bass note if that would sound appropriate. But it also means then that when you go into, for example, one of the parts, maybe it's just a tune or something else that you've got in here, then the chords will play back. So at least you get a kind of tonal center idea of where you are along with the tune, because the chord playback will be in there as well. And if you want to play with this a bit more, then of course open Halion, and I would suggest picking a slot, the current ones, because if you add a new instrument, then Halion's going to load it into slot 6 and slot 7 and carry on down. So maybe choose something like slot 16, stick a Rhodes or something else in there, and then in your chords section up here, you can choose slot 16, right sound for you. So there's a couple of options there playback wise. if you want to have a look at those. And of course, if you want to use them now, there's a Midi Instruments option at the bottom in version 1.1. So if you want your chords to play back or anything else to play back through a Midi instrument, then you can do that. Just press the plus item here and add your MIDI device accordingly. There's also some options now which we'll use, which is for importing and exporting. So if I go to export, I can export Music XML, of course, but I now get options to say which flows I want to export. So I can export individual flows if I had multiple flows in this file. The same then goes for if I go to export, I can export audio and I can export the flows individually if I want to. So if you've got multiple items that you need to create audio files for, or again for MIDI files or individual flows themselves. So there was a comment on Facebook, on the Facebook group, somebody said they had lots of ideas for a piece but didn't use them all, and they put them all in as individual flows, but then they wanted to be able to use this to export the flows that they hadn't currently used because they might want to use them later. So then later on, you come to import, and you can import a flow or MIDI or Music XML. So if I go to import flows, and I pick a file, it's just a Dorico project that I've used before, it will ask me which flows, and I only have one at the moment, and ask me, do I want to create all new players or merge with existing players? So I'll say merging is fine, because I know I already have a piano anyway, and I don't need another one. In my score here, I now have a new flow, and in setup mode, you can see the new flow's been imported. I'll just double click and relabel this one. We know which one's which. Now you might find this was actually from a MIDI file originally, and if you've ever seen things like this, where basically the notes, they're kind of tied over. So if you go into play mode now, and we're actually looking at a glockenspiel at the moment. So if I expand this one, I'll, oh, sorry. It would help if I looked at the right flow, wouldn't it? So here are the notes for the glockenspiel. You can expand these if you want to. So if you need a bit more space or anything else, you can expand some of these sections. But you can see if I switch now up here to notated durations, you'll see that the notes all kind of overhang into the next note. So I'm just going to drag a selection around all of those to select them. And because in write mode, the way my rhythm grid is set, when I come into here with the notes selected, I can just drag this left slightly, and all of these notes will then adjust. So now in write mode, you'll see that these notes are now all looking much nicer how I wanted them to be. I then had a question from somebody who wanted to create a kind of an index page showing a little excerpt of all of the bits of music. So if you go into engrave mode, you can right click and insert pages or press this little button down here. I'm going to insert one page. Before page one, I don't need a master page, thank you very much, so just press OK. And then turn on the frames toggle and add a music frame in here. So now I just drag out a music frame, and I can say I would like to put in here, maybe I'll choose the first flow, and then I'll have just who's playing? This alto saxophone had some music, didn't they? So there's a little example from what the saxophone was playing. Maybe I just want a couple of bars. I can do the same, of course, for any other sections or any other flows. So maybe in this flow, I just want the Neaten soprano glockenspiel part. And again, I can choose how much or how little music I want in that section. So if you want to add text and other items around here, and obviously you can move them around, you can make little examples up here of what is in the rest of the project as reminders, visual or otherwise, as to what's going on. Very quickly to finish, there was also about system text. System text is now available. So normally you would have used Shift X just to get this text item, but if you now use Shift Alt X, then you get very similar looking, but this is now system text. And of course, the option there is, although I said put it on the saxophone part, it's displaying it in the right place in the score, and will now, of course, also appear in all of the parts. So any of the parts I select now also have those as well. Also asked about box text. Now, it's not possible in quite the same way, but here's an option for anybody who wants it. If you create a text frame, and if we say this should be box text, and we'll make it Now, when you select a frame and you go into the properties panel at the bottom, you can show a border, and there's some options for border thickness and that kind of thing. And you can, of course, make this frame whatever size you need it to be, but that now will look like box text. System box text at the moment, because obviously it requires a frame, unless it was on exactly the same place on all the parts and you put it maybe into a master page template, but probably not. So maybe there'll be some changes on that front, but at the moment, if you just need a box text example, that might be one way of doing it. So as I said, I keep it short for this month, so we'll leave it there on kind of some of the chord symbols options that I would use. I'd love to hear from people on Discover Dorico at steinberg.de as to things that you would like to cover in the next session. The next session will be on Thursday, the 27th of July at the same time. Some people have asked about training before I forget. There's no news at the moment. I didn't quite expect quite so many people to be interested, so thank you very much for all the people who have. I've got all your details. There's many things, unfortunately, that still need to be discussed internally about the hows and wheres and those kind of things, but I have all your details, so I will be in touch as soon as I have any news. But sorry, it probably won't be as quick as I'd like it to be. But thank you all the same. I will be in touch. Maybe I'll see you all if anybody who's in Queensland next week, or if you're elsewhere over the month. And thank you for joining this session. Thank you very much.